The grand hall sparkled under the soft glow of crystal chandeliers. Marble floors gleamed like mirrors, reflecting the polished shoes of foreign CEOs and local officials who laughed and exchanged compliments. Their voices mixed with the clinking of expensive glasses and the rustle of silk suits. Here, power breathed its richest air. These were the Untouchables, men and women who believed nothing could touch them. Among them stood Traoré, a young man with eyes like burning coals, sharp, steady, full of silent fire. His clothes were simple, modest, nothing like the tailored suits surrounding him. Yet there was a weight in his stance, a quiet strength that cut through the luxury like a blade. Traoré moved through the crowd, listening but not speaking. His fists clenched lightly at his sides, barely noticeable to the others, but a clear sign of the storm brewing inside him. Around him, smiles hid greed, laughter covered secrets. They all thought they were safe, untouchable, protected by money and connections. But Traoré saw through the illusion. He remembered his village, the dusty roads, the tired faces of his family and friends who worked endlessly while these CEOs grew richer. His heart tightened with every shallow toast made in this hall. As the evening sun dipped lower, casting long shadows over the city skyline, Traoré's gaze hardened. The calm luxury of the summit felt like a fragile bubble, about to burst. Tonight, the balance of power was about to shift. Somewhere deep inside, a promise stirred. The promise that no one, no matter how powerful, would be above justice. The quiet before the storm was over. The crowd continued their chatter, unaware that history was being made in their midst. The sharp clang of metal echoed through the dark, dusty mine where Traoré's father had spent most of his life. The air was thick with dust and sweat, the faint light from a lone bulb flickering overhead. Traoré remembered those long days as a boy, standing at the edge of the pit, watching his father labor endlessly for a wage that barely fed the family. His father's hands, once strong and steady, grew rough and weak. The cold sickness settled, deep in his lungs, the kind no medicine could easily cure. Yet the foreign companies kept digging, filling their pockets with the earth's riches while his father and the men like him were left to suffer. Traoré's heart ached every time. He saw his father return home, exhausted and coughing, his eyes heavy with pain and silent despair. He remembered how his mother would nurse him through the nights, wiping away tears, whispering prayers for strength, but strength was fading. One evening, under the fading orange light of the setting sun, Traoré sat by his father's bedside. The room was small and bare, but in that moment it held a world of weight. His father's voice was weak but clear. "My son, promise me something." He reached out a trembling hand and took Traoré's. "Promise me you will fight for our people, for those who cannot speak, for justice." Tears filled Traoré's eyes, but his voice did not falter. "I promise, father." That promise lit a fire inside him, fierce and unyielding. But it was not an easy road ahead. Soon after, a wise old man named Amadou appeared in Traoré's life. A former activist who had seen his share of battles and betrayals, Amadou became Traoré's guide and mentor. One afternoon, beneath the shade of a baobab tree, Amadou's eyes held a warning. "Traoré, you must be careful. The powers you face are vast, they have money, influence, and will stop at nothing to protect their own. This path, it will test your courage and your heart. But remember, true strength is in knowing when to stand and when to wait." Traoré nodded, but inside a storm raged. Fear gripped him, not for himself, but for his mother, his younger sister, and the people who relied on him. Could he protect them while standing against giants? The weight of responsibility was heavy, but his father's words echoed louder than any doubt. Injustice had stolen too much already. Traoré's resolve hardened, his mind clear. He would fight. Not just for his family, but for every forgotten voice silenced by greed and power. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Traoré stood tall, ready to face whatever came next. The fire within him was no longer just a promise. It was a mission. The night was thick with silence, broken only by the faint hum of a flickering streetlight outside the small, cramped room where Traoré sat hunched over a stack of papers. The yellowed documents felt heavy in his hands, not just with age, but with the weight of secrets they carried. Secrets that could shake the very foundation of the powerful world above him. He traced his finger slowly across columns of numbers, names hidden behind codes and initials. Bills paid to shadow companies, transfers that didn't make sense, money vanishing from public funds, flowing instead into secret accounts offshore, billions stolen, his country's future stolen piece by piece. Traoré's breath quickened. This was more than corruption. It was a carefully woven web designed to keep the people powerless and silent. In the dim light, his phone buzzed quietly. A message popped up, a string of numbers and letters, a code he had learned to decipher. It was from one of his few trusted allies, a whistleblower inside the system, risking everything to help him. Meet tonight, Warehouse 14, midnight, come alone. He looked over his shoulder, heart pounding. The fear was real. He knew the bosses had eyes everywhere. They didn't want him digging so deep. But turning back now was impossible. That night, as the city slept, Traoré moved through shadowed streets, every step careful, every glance over his shoulder filled with dread. The warehouse stood like a ghost at the edge of town, its broken windows and rusted doors barely hiding the secrets inside. Inside, the air was cold and thick with dust. A small group waited, faces half hidden, voices low but steady. They handed him a folder, more documents, photographs of meetings between foreign CEOs and local politicians, shaking hands behind closed doors, exchanging envelopes thick with cash. It was clear now. This was no accident. The foreign bosses and the local leaders were partners in crime, an unholy alliance built on greed and fear. But with this truth came danger. Whispers began spreading, shadowy figures watching from alleyways, threatening phone calls in the dead of night, a broken window at his family home, his mother's worried eyes when he returned late. The weight pressed down on him. Could he protect the people he loved while standing against this monster? Loneliness crept in. Friends turned wary, afraid to be seen with him. The powerful had ways to silence voices like his. Yet, in the darkest moments, a small group stood by his side. Loyal, brave, determined. Together they planned carefully, sharing what they knew, preparing for the fight ahead. Traoré clenched his fists, the fire in his heart refusing to dim. The truth was out. The fight was no longer just his. It belonged to all who dreamed of justice. But as threats grew closer, and danger loomed large, Traoré knew this was just the beginning of a long and painful battle. The web was vast, but so was his will. The grand hall was filled with the hum of quiet conversations, the clinking of glasses, and the rustle of expensive suits. Crystal chandeliers cast a cold light over the crowd, a gathering of the world's most powerful foreign CEOs and influential local officials. They had met here many times before, confident in their untouchable status, protected by layers of money and silence. But tonight was different. Traoré stood at the entrance, his heart pounding like a drum in his chest. His eyes scanned the sea of faces, smug, relaxed, certain of their power. They didn't see him as a threat. They never did. He moved forward, each step heavy with purpose. The chatter slowly died as he climbed the stage, the room filling with surprised murmurs. Security eyes flicked to him, fingers tightening around radios. But no one stopped him. He faced the crowd with calm resolve, his voice steady but full of fire. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, "you sit here comfortably hiding behind your titles and money. But tonight, I bring truth. The truth about what you have stolen. Not just money, but the dignity and lives of my people." A sharp gasp echoed from the front rows. Eyes widened, whispers grew louder. Traoré reached into his briefcase and pulled out thick folders. "Here are the bank statements, emails, and secret accounts you tried to bury." He laid them on the podium, the pages heavy with proof. Names were there. Powerful names. Untouchable names. Now exposed. The crowd shifted uncomfortably. Some faces flushed red with anger. Others froze in shock. One of the foreign CEOs, a man known for his cold smile, leaned forward, eyes narrowed, whispering urgently to his aide. Security guards subtly moved closer, their presence suddenly more aggressive. But Traoré didn't flinch. My father was a miner. For years he worked under brutal conditions, breathing dust and poison so you could grow richer. His voice cracked, raw with emotion. He fell ill. I watched him waste away while you counted your profits. This is why I stand here. Today, the room grew silent, the weight of his words hanging heavy. Some officials exchanged nervous glances. Few tried to interrupt, voices sharp and demanding. "This is a private meeting," one shouted. But Traoré raised his hand, stopping them. "This is not just a meeting, it's a reckoning." The tension was electric. The CEO's power felt fragile now, their empire of lies crumbling under the harsh light of truth. Whispers turned to murmurs of disbelief, some people backing away, unsure where to stand. Security moved in, but Traoré's supporters in the crowd stood firm, their eyes burning with hope. In that moment, Traoré was not just a man. He was the voice of every silent sufferer, the spark of a revolution that could no longer be ignored. The first stunned silence settled. A security officer stepped forward, his tone cautious but firm. "Sir, you must leave the stage." Traoré took a deep breath, looking out at the crowd, the powerful, the frightened, and the hopeful. His voice rose again, unwavering. "This fight is far from over. But tonight you have heard the truth, and the truth will set us free." With that, he stepped down, surrounded by a mix of gasps, whispered conversations, and tightened security. Outside the hall, the world was beginning to shift. The moment Traoré's voice faded in the grand hall, chaos erupted like a storm unleashed. The powerful CEOs and officials, once so calm and collected, now swirled in a frenzy of anger and fear. Faces twisted in fury, eyes burned with disbelief. Some shouted threats under their breath. Others hurriedly whispered bribes, desperate to spin the story back in their favor. One of the foreign CEOs, his usual cold smile gone, slammed his fist on the table. "This is an attack on everything we've built. We will not let this man destroy us." His voice was low but fierce, sending a chill across the room. Security tightened around Traoré and the evidence he had presented. Officials scrambled to contact lawyers and PR teams, trying to craft statements that would calm the rising storm. But outside the polished walls of the summit, the real storm was just beginning. News cameras swarmed, their lenses hungry for the explosive story. Live broadcasts showed Traoré's face on every screen, his words echoing through homes, streets, and markets. Social media exploded. Hashtags supporting Traoré trended worldwide. Millions shared his story, calling for justice, for change. Yet, beneath the growing wave of support, darker forces stirred. Traoré's phone rang nonstop. Threatening calls, warnings cloaked in polite voices, demands to back down. The messages were clear: stop now or face the consequences. His family was not spared. One evening, as his mother closed the small shop where she sold handmade crafts, a group of shadowy men lingered nearby. They whispered threats that reached her ears like poison. Traoré's younger sister received a cruel note slipped under her door. Fear wrapped tightly around the family's hearts. Traoré sat alone in his small apartment, the weight of it all pressing down like a storm cloud. He stared at the photos of his family, the memory of his father's promise burning brighter than ever. But doubt crept in. Was he putting them in danger? Was this fight worth the cost? Even his closest allies began to waver. Some, gripped by fear, pulled away quietly. One trusted friend whispered, "This is bigger than us, maybe it's time to rethink." Their betrayal stabbed deeply, shaking Traoré's resolve. But from the shadows of fear, hope began to rise. Across towns and villages, ordinary people, workers, students, mothers, rallied behind Traoré. They carried signs, shared his story, and spoke out against the corruption that had long stolen their futures. Small grassroots groups formed, united by courage and the promise of change. In the face of threats and betrayal, Traoré found strength in their faces, determined, hopeful, ready to stand with him. The battle was no longer just his. It belonged to everyone who had suffered in silence, to everyone who dared to believe that justice was possible. And with every breath, Traoré's fire burned brighter. The world was watching now. What began as whispers in quiet towns had become a roaring wave of truth. Journalists from across the globe dug deeper, their pens sharp and unyielding. Investigative reports aired on television, revealing the tangled web of corruption that had stolen billions from Traoré's country. Social media campaigns spread like wildfire, lighting fires of hope in hearts everywhere. Activists, inspired by Traoré's courage, joined forces with local leaders. Together they marched through crowded streets, their voices rising in unison, demanding justice, demanding change. The atmosphere was electric. Fear still lingered in the shadows, but hope burned brighter. The tide was turning. Inside government offices, cracks appeared in the once solid wall of silence. A few brave officials, pushed by the relentless public pressure, opened investigations. Arrests followed. Quiet, cautious but real. The powerful could no longer hide behind their wealth and influence. For Traoré, this was more than a victory. It was a chance to heal. He stood side by side with community leaders and ordinary citizens, their faces tired but determined. Each speech he gave carried the weight of his people's pain and dreams. His voice, once shaky with fear, now carried strength and resolve. One afternoon, under a sky heavy with promise, Traoré faced a crowd gathered in the town square. Children waved handmade signs. Mothers held hands with fathers, united. The energy was contagious. "We are not alone," Traoré said, his eyes scanning the sea of hopeful faces. "Together we can rebuild what was stolen. Together we can demand a future where our children live with dignity." Tears glistened in many eyes. The message was clear. This fight was not just his. It belonged to all who believed in justice. And, in a quiet moment away from the crowd, Traoré sought out the friends who had once turned away, their fear pulling them apart. "I forgive you," he said, his voice soft but firm. "We need each other now more than ever. Only together can we break this cycle." The old wounds did not vanish instantly, but the act of forgiveness opened a door to unity. As days turned into weeks, the movement grew stronger. Stories of courage spread, neighbors protecting each other, whistleblowers coming forward, voices, once silenced, now heard loud and clear. The road ahead remained difficult, but for the first time the future felt possible. Traoré's journey had transformed from a lone battle into a collective movement, a turning tide sweeping away the Yi. Darkness carrying hope on its rising waves. The sun dipped low over the horizon, casting a warm orange glow across the sea of faces gathered in the great square. Thousands stood shoulder to shoulder, young and old, rich and poor, all united by a single hope. Their eyes fixed on the small stage where Traoré would speak. His heart pounded, not from fear but from the weight of what this moment meant. Months of struggle had led to this. Victories had been won, yet the battle was far from over. The crowd waited, silent but expectant. Traoré stepped forward, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "Today we stand together," he began, scanning the crowd like a man seeing his family after a long journey. "We have faced giants and forced them to reveal their lies. We have torn down walls built on greed and silence." A ripple of cheers swept through the crowd. "But," he said, raising a hand to hush the noise, "this victory is only the beginning." His eyes darkened with a fierce light. "There are deeper shadows, powers far beyond what we have uncovered. Powerful forces, tied to global money and influence, still move in secret, pulling strings, hiding behind facades of respectability." The crowd grew still again, a chill creeping through the air despite the fading sun. Traoré took a breath, the memory of his father's worn hands and tired eyes flashing behind his own. "My father worked the mines. He fell ill because of the poisons they buried beneath our land. I promised him I would fight. For him, for all of us. He paused, voice cracking with quiet pain. This fight has cost us dearly. Fear, threats, the safety of those we love. But it has also shown us our strength. His gaze locked with the crowd, fierce and determined. Now I ask you, will you stand with me? Will you raise your voice even when it trembles, or will you let silence win? For a moment, the world seemed to hold its breath. Then a thunderous roar erupted, the crowd rising as one, shouting, clapping, a wave of courage washing over the square. Traoré smiled, a mix of hope and steely resolve shining in his eyes. As he stepped back, looking out over the faces illuminated by torchlight, he knew the road ahead would be long and hard. But this was a new beginning. The fight would continue, and together they would not back down.